The atmosphere at the rally was electric, charged with the kind of anticipation that only a political showdown could bring. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, known for her bold statements and fiery rhetoric, was about to take the stage. The crowd buzzed, their phones raised, waiting for her every word, eager for a glimpse into the future of progressive politics. But amidst the sea of excited faces, one person was there for an entirely different reason. John Kennedy, the outspoken U.S. Senator from Louisiana, had arrived unannounced, his presence unexpected and utterly unwelcome. He wasn't part of the official program, and certainly not on AOC's radar. As he made his way through the crowd, a few raised eyebrows followed him. His southern drawl and slow gait stood in stark contrast to the sharp, quick-paced energy of AOC's supporters. To many, he was just another politician, a relic of the old guard. But to others, he was a symbol of everything they were trying to overcome. As AOC took the microphone, her sharp gaze scanned the crowd, and then her eyes landed on Kennedy. Without missing a beat, she gave a subtle nod to the security team standing nearby, signaling them to handle the situation. The tension was palpable as security made their way toward Kennedy, who stood calmly, unfazed by the approaching threat. The crowd quieted, whispering, some hoping for a confrontation, others unsure of what was about to happen. "AOC wants me gone?" Kennedy muttered to himself, a wry smile forming on his lips. He could see the movement in the crowd, the excitement, the cameras flashing, and the energy that seemed to stir at the thought of him being removed. But Kennedy had never been one to back down from a challenge. As the security guards reached him, he turned to face them, his voice calm but unwavering. "Tell AOC," he said with a mischievous grin, "I'm not going anywhere." The audience, hearing this, gasped. A few murmurs ran through the crowd, and then, like a wave crashing over the room, the crowd's attention shifted. What was supposed to be a simple removal turned into a spectacle that no one had anticipated. Kennedy had just made his first move, and the stage was set for something far more than a simple political rally. AOC stood at the podium, her stance firm and resolute as she scanned the crowd. She had always prided herself on her ability to control a room, to command the energy of a space filled with hundreds, sometimes thousands of people. Today was no different. She had come prepared to speak about the future of America, her ideas for progressive change, and the urgent need to dismantle the systems of power that had long dominated Washington. But as she looked out at the crowd, her gaze locked with that of John Kennedy, standing defiantly in the middle of the room, and for a moment, everything shifted. Kennedy wasn't just a senator. He was a symbol of everything AOC had worked against, a figurehead of the old political establishment. His southern drawl and folksy charm had made him a favorite of the conservative base. But to her and many of her supporters, he represented a different kind of problem: stagnation. Kennedy's presence in the rally wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a challenge, a statement that her efforts to disrupt the status quo were under threat. AOC had long known that Kennedy wasn't afraid of confrontation. His reputation for speaking his mind, no matter the cost, had earned him both admiration and contempt. But here, in this moment, with his bold refusal to leave, AOC felt a surge of frustration. Why couldn't he just stay in his lane? Why was he always so eager to disrupt her efforts? But more than that, there was an edge of fear in her. Kennedy wasn't just an older politician who would fade into the background. He was a master of his own narrative, and he knew how to play the game. His presence here, especially now at the height of her rally, was a clear move to undermine her credibility. AOC had spent years building her platform on the idea of change, of challenging the establishment, and now, this very establishment embodied by Kennedy, was challenging her in the most public way possible. As AOC began her speech, she could feel the eyes of the crowd shifting between her and Kennedy. His calm demeanor, his deliberate movements, his unapologetic defiance, it was all so deliberate. And that's what unsettled her. Kennedy didn't seem nervous. He didn't seem scared. He was a man who had been through the grind of politics for decades, a man who knew how to handle a crowd, even one like this. He had a certain authority that she couldn't deny, and in that moment AOC understood exactly what he was doing. He wasn't just there to make a statement. He was there to force her hand. She shifted uncomfortably at the podium, trying to keep her focus. The crowd's murmurs grew louder. Her mind raced, trying to think of the right way to regain control of the situation. Her words needed to be sharper, more pointed, something that would cut through the rising tension. But then, as if on cue, the security guards moved toward Kennedy, their presence making it clear that AOC had given them orders to remove him. The crowd went silent, the tension thickening. AOC's voice trembled for a split second, but she quickly regained her composure. "Ladies and gentlemen, please," she began, addressing the crowd with a calm that betrayed the chaos brewing inside her. "This is a space for dialogue, for progress. We cannot allow ourselves to be distracted by those who wish to bring division." But as she spoke, Kennedy did something unexpected. He turned to face the security team standing his ground. "You know," he said, loud enough for the crowd to hear, "AOC may think she can have me removed, but in America, the right to speak your mind doesn't go away just because someone's uncomfortable." His voice, steady and unyielding, rippled through the crowd, causing a stir. People turned to look at him, their curiosity piqued. AOC's eyes narrowed as she watched Kennedy. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He was supposed to be a sideshow, someone who would leave quietly. But now he was making himself the center of attention. His defiance was a direct challenge to everything she stood for, and in that moment, she realized how much power he still had. The security guards hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to press forward or to back down in the face of such resistance. Kennedy wasn't just a politician. He was a figurehead, a symbol of a political era that AOC had long fought to move past. But now, standing before her, he was forcing her to confront the very system she had spent so long trying to dismantle. His calm defiance felt like a direct challenge to her, and in that moment, AOC's fear was palpable. She wasn't just worried about losing control of the rally. She was worried that in this standoff she might lose more than that. The room held its breath. The moment hung in the air, charged with the kind of tension that only politics could create. Would AOC press forward and continue with her speech? Or would Kennedy's challenge be the thing that shifted the course of the entire rally? The tension in the room thickened as John Kennedy stood unflinching, facing the security guards that were still unsure whether to push forward or step back. The audience could feel it, a magnetic pull between two powerful figures, each representing a different side of America's political divide. The young, fiery progressive in AOC, and the seasoned, unrelenting conservative in Kennedy. The crowd shifted uneasily, their eyes darting between the two. It was clear, this wasn't just about a simple political rally anymore. This was a battle for control, for the soul of a nation torn between change and tradition. AOC's heart raced as her eyes locked on Kennedy. She had expected him to back down. She had expected him to be the one to leave, to make the situation more manageable. But instead, he stood there like a man who had faced far greater challenges than this. His calm, deliberate movements were a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding around them. And in that silence, as the guards hesitated, she realized something. Kennedy wasn't afraid. He wasn't intimidated by her, by the rally, or by the thousands of people who were watching him. He was in control of this moment, and she, for the first time in a long while, wasn't. "Senator Kennedy," AOC called out, her voice steady but tinged with frustration. "You've made your point, but we're not going to let you hijack this rally." She gestured toward the security, her fingers trembling slightly as the weight of her words hung in the air. She had to act quickly or she might lose everything. "Please, let's not turn this into a spectacle." But Kennedy's smirk only deepened. "Spectacle? Darling, I'm not here for the show." He looked at her with a raised eyebrow, his voice dropping a notch. "I'm here because the people deserve a voice that speaks for them, not one that silences anyone who dares to disagree." A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Some eyes turned to AOC, some to Kennedy. There was a palpable shift in the air, a feeling of unease mixed with excitement. Kennedy was a politician, sure, but in this moment he wasn't acting like one. He wasn't playing the game the way AOC had expected. And the crowd? They were starting to buy into it. Kennedy wasn't just defying her. He was defying everything she stood for, and in doing so, he was making her seem like just another politician, one who feared the discomfort of confrontation. AOC took a step forward, her voice now louder, almost pleading. "You don't get it, Kennedy. This isn't about politics. This is about creating a future that works for everyone, not just for the powerful, not just for the ones who can afford to sit in their ivory towers and talk about change." She pointed toward the stage, her eyes intense, You represent the old guard. You represent the very system that has failed so many of us. I will not let you stand here and undermine everything we've worked for." Kennedy's eyes softened slightly, but the challenge was still there. "You think I'm the one undermining you? You who stands on the podium preaching about unity, while silencing anyone who disagrees with you? You think that makes you different from the very politicians you claim to hate?" The crowd was now hanging on every word. Some of them shifted uncomfortably, while others seemed to lean in, eager to see how this standoff would play out. The security guards, still hovering behind Kennedy, now seemed uncertain about how to handle the situation. AOC's team watched with bated breath. The scene was slowly spiraling out of control, and AOC was caught between pushing forward with her message or dealing with the growing tension in the room. Kennedy took a step closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "You think politics is about who can scream the loudest, AOC? It's about who can hold their ground when everything seems to be stacked against them." He paused, his voice lowering. "You think you're the only one who's fighting for change? I've spent my whole career challenging the system. It's just that my way of doing it looks a little different from yours." AOC's jaw tightened. She didn't want to admit it, but she could feel the ground shifting beneath her. Kennedy wasn't just challenging her ideology. He was questioning her methods, her very approach to politics. And it hit harder than she expected. "Enough with the lectures, Kennedy," AOC snapped, her frustration bubbling over. "You're not going to make me doubt my values. You can't intimidate me." But Kennedy didn't flinch. "I'm not trying to intimidate you, AOC. I'm trying to remind you of what real change looks like." He turned to the crowd. "It's not about being popular, and it's not about silencing the people who don't agree with you. It's about standing up for what's right even when it's hard, even when the crowd is against you." The room was silent now, save for the occasional camera shutter from the press. Kennedy's words hung in the air, the weight of them settling over everyone like a thick fog. Some in the crowd were nodding, others still unsure. AOC's grip on the podium tightened, but she remained silent, her emotions a mix of anger and something deeper, uncertainty. And in that moment, Kennedy did the unthinkable. He turned toward the security guards, signaling them to step back. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, his voice calm but full of resolve. The guards hesitated, their eyes flicking to AOC for confirmation, but she nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Kennedy had called her bluff, and in doing so, he had just won the first round. The crowd erupted in applause, some cheering, others stunned. AOC, however, stood frozen, her mind racing. She had expected this to be an easy win, a simple removal. But Kennedy had flipped the script on her, and for the first time that day, AOC was the one who had lost control. The room was filled with the electric hum of whispered conversations, the atmosphere charged with an energy that felt almost tangible. Kennedy's unexpected defiance had thrown AOC off balance, and the crowd was buzzing with the fallout. While AOC's supporters still stood firm, her confidence had been shaken. Kennedy had not only refused to leave, he had turned the situation into his own platform, using his defiance to spotlight his own strength. The tension between the two was palpable, but it wasn't over yet. This was only the beginning. AOC, still standing at the podium, felt her mind racing. She had been prepared for confrontation, but this wasn't how she envisioned it. She had assumed Kennedy would be a quick, easy target, a relic of the past who could be swept aside with a few pointed words. Instead, he had flipped the script, forcing her to become the one on the defensive. The crowd had grown restless, and AOC's frustration began to simmer beneath the surface. She needed to regain control to remind everyone why she was there. But Kennedy wasn't about to let her regain control just yet. He stood confidently in the center of the room, hands loosely clasped behind his back, his eyes scanning the crowd as if he were preparing for the next round of a battle. He knew he had the upper hand, and that knowledge made him all the more dangerous. The moment of silence stretched on, as AOC considered her next move. She knew the crowd was watching, waiting for someone to make the next move. It was clear that Kennedy wasn't going to give up easily. But what could she do to counter him? What could she say to remind everyone that she was the one they had come to hear, not him? Kennedy broke the silence, his voice calm but full of purpose. "You know, AOC, I've spent a lot of time in the trenches of politics. I've fought battles you can't even begin to imagine. I've been told that I wouldn't win, that I didn't belong, but here I am. And you know what I've learned through all of it?" He paused, his gaze fixed on her. "I've learned that real change isn't about being loud or flashy. It's about doing the hard work. It's about taking the punches and getting back up. AOC's eyes narrowed. This wasn't what she expected. He wasn't attacking her, not directly. Instead, he was subtly undermining her approach, questioning her methods. She had been bracing for a fight, but Kennedy wasn't playing by the rules. His words were like daggers wrapped in a smile, and that smile was starting to irk her. "You think you have all the answers, don't you?" AOC retorted, her voice laced with annoyance. "You think just because you've been around longer that you know what's best for this country? But that's the problem, Kennedy. You're part of the old guard, the ones who've held the reins for too long. You're so entrenched in the system that you can't see how badly it needs to change." Kennedy didn't flinch. In fact, he chuckled softly. "You're right about one thing," he said, his voice calm, almost amused. "I've been around longer, and you're right that the system needs change. But what you don't understand is that change doesn't come from just tearing things down. It comes from rebuilding, from working with people, from finding common ground. You can't force change by demanding it. You have to earn it." AOC's chest tightened. She wanted to argue, to refute his every word, but something about the calm confidence in his voice made her hesitate. Kennedy wasn't just an adversary. He was a reminder of everything she had worked against. And yet there was a part of her that couldn't help but admire his conviction. Kennedy saw the flicker of doubt in her eyes, and he pressed on. "But I'm not here to lecture you, AOC. I'm here to show you something." He stepped forward, his voice lowering as he spoke. "I'm here to show you that politics isn't just about the next big speech or the latest viral moment. It's about people, real people. People who are hurting, people who are struggling. You can't change their lives with a hashtag or a soundbite. You have to understand them. You have to fight for them." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over her. The crowd had fallen silent, hanging on every syllable. Kennedy's presence was magnetic, drawing everyone in. Even AOC. He had just shifted the narrative, and she could feel the power of his words, even if she hated to admit it. "But you," Kennedy continued, his voice steady and unyielding, "you're not interested in real change. You're interested in power, in making sure that your voice is the loudest, that your message is the one that's heard. And that's why you're so afraid of me, because I'm not interested in playing your game. I'm here to play a different one." AOC's face flushed with anger. "You don't know me, Kennedy. You don't know what I've fought for." She took a step forward, her eyes blazing. "You think you can come here and undermine everything I've worked for? You think you can silence me with your old tricks? You've underestimated me." Kennedy's smile never faltered. "I'm not trying to silence you, AOC. I'm trying to wake you up." He turned toward the crowd, his voice rising. "This isn't about us. This is about all of you. It's about giving you the power to decide, to choose what kind of future you want to live in. And I won't let anyone take that away." The crowd erupted in applause. Kennedy had just turned the tide in his favor once again, not with brute force, but with the strength of his words. AOC stood there, her breath heavy, her mind racing. She had just been outplayed, and she didn't know how to recover from it. The crowd's cheers still echoed in the room, but AOC stood frozen, her mind racing. Kennedy had just delivered a blow she hadn't anticipated. His words were calculated, piercing straight to the core of her beliefs. She had been prepared for confrontation, but not for a lesson in humility. The irony stung. This man, a symbol of the establishment she had spent so long railing against, was now showing her what it meant to truly fight for change. AOC's hands trembled slightly, her frustration building. She had come here to inspire, to lead, but Kennedy had done what she hadn't expected. He had made her question her own methods. And that wasn't something she was willing to accept. She couldn't show weakness now, not in front of the very people who had placed their hopes in her, but at the same time she couldn't deny that Kennedy had something she lacked, an unshakable resolve. She looked around the room, seeing the faces of the crowd, their eyes filled with curiosity and anticipation. Some were still with her, still clinging to the hope that she could offer the change they so desperately wanted. Others, though, had shifted, their loyalties now uncertain. Kennedy had taken control of the moment, and it was clear that AOC had lost the upper hand. Kennedy, on the other hand, seemed completely at ease. His posture was relaxed, his hands loosely folded in front of him as he addressed the crowd. But beneath his calm exterior there was something more. A fire burned in his eyes, a fire that came from years of fighting, of navigating the political machine that had so often tried to shut him down. He wasn't just a politician. He was a man who had been to hell and back, and that experience had shaped him into someone who could not be shaken. As the cheers died down, AOC took a deep breath and stepped forward. Her voice, though still edged with anger, held a new intensity. "I won't stand here and let you dictate the future of this country," she said, her words sharp, but her tone betraying the inner conflict she was battling. "You may think that your way of doing things is the answer, but it's not. It's the same old playbook, the same old rhetoric, and it's not going to work. We need something different. We need bold action. We need people who are willing to fight for what's right, no matter the cost." Kennedy's gaze never left her, and for a moment, it almost felt like a standoff, a battle of wills. AOC's words were filled with conviction, but there was a hint of uncertainty beneath them. Kennedy's calm demeanor was like a mirror, reflecting her own doubts back at her. She had spent years trying to convince people that her way was the only way. But now, in this moment, she had to admit that maybe, just maybe, there was another path to change. Kennedy took a slow step toward her, his voice measured, yet unwavering. "AOC, I respect your passion. I respect your fight. But change doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen with a single speech or a viral hashtag. Change happens when you're willing to put in the work. When you're willing to listen to the people who don't have a voice, to the ones who are struggling to make ends meet. It happens when you get your hands dirty, when you fight for what's right even when the odds are stacked against you." His words, though simple, carried weight. They weren't just a critique of her methods, they were a challenge. A challenge to see beyond the surface of politics, to understand that real change required more than just grand ideals. It required action. It required sacrifice. It required compromise. AOC looked at him, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. Her chest tightened as the realization began to sink in. She wasn't just fighting against Kennedy or his conservative views. She was fighting against a system that was much bigger than either of them. And that system wasn't going to fall with a single speech. She swallowed hard, her gaze never wavering from his. "I know what you're trying to say," she muttered, her voice quieter now but still laced with emotion. "I know that change doesn't come easily, but I can't be the one to sit back and wait for it to happen. I can't just let things stay the way they are. I have to fight for what's right." Kennedy nodded slowly, his eyes softening. "And you should, AOC, you should fight. But you don't have to do it alone. And you don't have to fight for the wrong reasons. Don't fight for power. Don't fight to prove a point. Fight for the people. Fight for the ones who don't have a voice. Fight for the future of this country, not for your own political gain." AOC's heart pounded in her chest, the weight of his words settling heavily in her mind. This wasn't the fight she had expected, but it was the fight she needed. She had been so focused on tearing down the system, on challenging every institution she could, that she had forgotten why she started fighting in the first place. It wasn't about winning. It was about changing lives. She looked out at the crowd, their eyes filled with expectation, their hopes riding on her every word. It was time for a shift, a change not just in policy but in approach. She took a deep breath, the weight of her decision settling in. Kennedy had shown her that there was a different way to fight. "All right," AOC said, her voice steady now, a renewed confidence emerging. "I see what you're saying, Kennedy. Maybe I've been too focused on the wrong things. But I'm here to tell you I'm not backing down. I will fight for this country, for its people, and I'll do it my way." Kennedy smiled, his eyes gleaming with respect. That's all anyone can ask for. In that moment, AOC felt a shift within herself, a transformation. She wasn't just the fiery young congresswoman anymore. She was something more. And the battle, as it turned out, wasn't just about defeating an opponent. It was about learning, growing, and knowing when to adapt. The room was alive with tension as the moment of reckoning drew near. AOC and Kennedy stood on opposite ends, both refusing to back down, but now, the battle had transcended politics. It was no longer just a contest of ideas. It was a fight for influence, a war for the future of their country. And the stakes had never been higher. AOC stood at the podium, her heart racing as she prepared to deliver the final blow. She had come into this rally with a clear message, a mission to inspire and lead. But now, after everything that had happened, after Kennedy's defiance, his unexpected challenge, her resolve was wavering. The crowd could sense it. The energy in the room had shifted, and it wasn't in her favor. Kennedy, on the other hand, was calm, composed, almost serene. He had entered this rally with the odds stacked against him. But now he was the one who had seized control. He had played the long game, letting AOC make the first move only to counter her with a series of well-timed moves that exposed her weaknesses and her blind spots. And now it was time for the final act. The media was in a frenzy, their cameras flashing, capturing every moment as if they knew this was more than just a political confrontation. This was history unfolding. People all over the world were watching, waiting for one of them to make the decisive move. The question hung in the air. Would AOC rise to the occasion and rally the crowd, or would Kennedy's steady resolve win the day? AOC took a deep breath, her mind racing as she prepared her final words. She couldn't afford to lose here. She couldn't afford to let Kennedy outshine her in front of all these people. This was her moment to prove that she was the future, that her vision for a better America was the one that would carry the day. "Enough of the games," AOC said, her voice sharp, the edge of anger creeping into her words. "This isn't about politics. This is about power, the power of the people versus the power of those who seek to control us. And let me tell you something, Kennedy. I won't sit here and let you drag us back to the past. I won't let you derail the progress we've made. We need change. We need justice. And I will fight for that no matter what it takes." Her words hung in the air, fierce and unrelenting. She looked out at the crowd, seeing the eyes of her supporters gleam with hope, feeling the energy shift ever so slightly in her favor. But she knew this wasn't enough. She had to push further, to go deeper, to expose Kennedy for the relic of the past that he was. But before she could continue, Kennedy raised his hand, signaling for her to stop. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to him. It was his turn now. He stepped forward, his voice calm but unyielding, cutting through the tension like a knife. "AOC, you've got passion. I'll give you that. But passion alone isn't enough. You're trying to change the world, but you're doing it from a place of anger and frustration. You're letting the system control you. Control your thoughts, your actions, your decisions, and that's why you can't see the bigger picture. You're focused on tearing things down, but you don't see that what we need is to build, to create, to unite." The crowd was quiet now, listening intently. AOC's chest tightened as his words sank in. Was he right? Was she letting the system control her without even realizing it? Was she so caught up in her righteous anger that she had lost sight of the true purpose of her fight? Kennedy continued, his voice steady, unwavering. "I'm not trying to tear things down. I'm here to show you that real change is about building bridges, not burning them. Real change is about listening to the people, understanding their struggles, and working with them to create solutions that will last. We can't just keep fighting each other. We have to come together and fight for something better, something bigger than ourselves." AOC felt the weight of his words, the truth of them sinking deep into her. For the first time, she realized that this wasn't about winning or losing. It was about finding a way to work together, to move forward, to build something that would last. But how could she do that when her every instinct had been to destroy, to dismantle the system that had oppressed so many for so long? Kennedy's gaze softened as he watched her struggle. "I'm not your enemy, AOC. I may not agree with everything you stand for, but I'm here to fight alongside you. We can't do this alone, none of us can. So let's stop the fighting, stop the division, and figure out how we can make this country a better place for everyone." The crowd was quiet, waiting for AOC's response. She felt the weight of their eyes on her, but more importantly, she felt the weight of her own conviction. She had always believed that fighting was the only way to change the world. But now, Kennedy had made her question that belief. Was there another way? Could she do more than just fight? AOC took a deep breath, her voice softer now, but no less determined. "You're right, Kennedy. It's not just about fighting, it's about finding common ground, about working together. I've spent so much time trying to tear things down. I didn't realize that building something better requires more than just destruction. It requires collaboration." The crowd erupted into applause, but it wasn't just because AOC had admitted Kennedy was right. It was because in that moment, they had witnessed something greater than a political standoff. They had seen two people, two politicians come to terms with their differences, and in doing so, they had shown the world what real leadership looked like. The room was filled with an energy that could only be described as a mixture of hope and uncertainty. AOC and Kennedy stood on the stage, their earlier confrontation now behind them. but the echo of their words still lingered in the air, hanging like a storm cloud waiting to break. The crowd was restless, unsure of what to make of what had just transpired. They had watched as these two political titans clashed, each one firm in their convictions, each one unwilling to back down. And yet something had changed. AOC's heart pounded in her chest as she looked at Kennedy. He had taken her by surprise. Not only had he refused to bow down, but he had also made her rethink everything she thought she knew about politics, about leadership, about change. She had come into this rally believing she had all the answers, that her way was the only way. But now, as she stood on the same stage as Kennedy, she wasn't so sure. She had fought so hard for what she believed in, pushing and pulling, trying to tear down the system that she saw as broken. But Kennedy had reminded her that tearing things down wasn't enough. You had to build something better, something sustainable, and that meant working together even with those who didn't share your views. It wasn't just about winning, it was about creating something that would last for generations to come. AOC took a deep breath, her gaze meeting Kennedy's. For a moment, there was an unspoken understanding between them. They weren't enemies anymore. They weren't just opposing political figures. They were both leaders, and they had both learned something important from this experience. AOC, Kennedy began, his voice steady but filled with a quiet conviction. I know we don't agree on everything, but I think today, we've both learned that the fight for change isn't just about power. It's about people, about understanding their struggles, their fears, and their dreams. And once we understand that, we can actually make a difference. AOC nodded, her eyes bright with a mixture of gratitude and realization. You're right, Kennedy. I've spent so much time fighting the system, thinking that the only way to make change was through confrontation. But maybe it's time I start listening. Maybe it's time we all start listening. The crowd was silent, as if holding its breath, waiting for something more to happen. Kennedy stepped forward, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Look, no matter what side of the aisle we're on, we're all Americans. We all want the same thing, a better future. And if we're going to get there, we have to stop fighting each other and start working together. It's not easy, but nothing worth fighting forever is. AOC felt a wave of emotion wash over her. This wasn't the moment she had imagined when she first stepped onto this stage. She had expected to leave with the crowd chanting her name, basking in the glory of victory. But what she hadn't expected was this moment of humility, of growth, of understanding. And she knew that it wasn't just a victory for Kennedy or for her. It was a victory for the people watching. The applause began slowly, tentatively, but as the two of them stood there side by side, it grew louder and more genuine. People had witnessed something remarkable today. They had seen two political figures come together, not in agreement but in mutual respect. They had seen two sides of the aisle set aside their differences and, for a moment, put the country first. Kennedy turned to the crowd, his voice now amplified by the moment's weight. This isn't about me or AOC. This is about all of you. About each person in this room who is fighting for a better tomorrow. You're the ones who matter. You're the ones who have the power to make change. AOC stepped forward, joining him at the front of the stage. I've learned a lot today, she said, her voice clear, her tone filled with sincerity. And I promise you I won't stop fighting for what's right. But I also promise that I'll listen. I'll listen to the people who may not agree with me, to the ones whose voices have been silenced for too long. And together we'll create a future that works for everyone. The crowd erupted in applause. This wasn't just a political rally anymore. It had become a moment of unity, a turning point. People had come here expecting a fight, but what they left with was something far more powerful, a sense of hope, a sense that despite the deep divides in this country, change was possible. But it wouldn't come from tearing each other down. It would come from coming together. As the applause died down, Kennedy leaned in slightly, his voice low so only AOC could hear. You've got something special, AOC. Just don't lose sight of why you started in the first place. AOC smiled, the weight of the moment settling in. She had come here today thinking she had everything figured out, But now, she realized that sometimes the greatest leaders were the ones who were willing to listen, to learn, and to grow. She had learned from Kennedy today, but more importantly, she had learned from the people who had been watching. And that, she realized, was the greatest lesson of all.